Living systems like rainforests and coral reefs, and you, and organizations, and economies, and all of humanity together. All of these follow the same simple pattern. And thank you. And as we come to understand this pattern, it changes what it means to be human and alive and at work in the world. Now, before I reveal the pattern, first I want to tell you how I came to be looking around for patterns of living systems in the world, because my own story is connected to the bigger story. I started my career in marketing, and it was fun, but most of all, it was really disillusioning. Marketing seemed so superficial and manipulative to me. And I worked for some of the best, and still I wondered, is this the best formula we have for engaging customers? Because it seems like we're missing something here, something really important. But I thought maybe marketing just isn't for me. And I decided to move into employee engagement. I joined a small consulting firm, and we helped our clients increase profit and productivity by tapping into their employees' passion and purpose and creativity. We talked about engaging the human spirit. And that felt much more meaningful to me. But I noticed that many of the organizational leaders who were our clients had this strangely familiar, superficial, and manipulative attitude. So they would say to us, we don't really want to talk about the human spirit. This is business, remember? We just want you to tell us what buttons to push to get those people to work harder for the same amount of money. And I thought, is this the best formula we have for engaging employees? Because it seems like we're missing something here, something really important. About the same time, I started to notice that humanity in general seemed to be stuck in unsustainable patterns. And more of us were starting to recognize it, but we couldn't imagine different ways of being. And again, I wondered, what are we missing here? Then it occurred to me that the common thread across all of these observations of mine was this overarching guiding story we have about how the world works. So we have this story that tells us that businesses operate like machines, or even that they actually are machines, programmed to make a profit. They're separate from us and separate from nature. And that same story tells us that we exist, primarily to compete and consume in similar machine-like fashion. This story then shapes every facet of our lives, whether we realize it or not. And of course, there's some truth and logic to the story, but the problem is that there isn't much life to it. There isn't much about what makes us wonderfully human and alive. And as we live out that story, we lose touch with the wonder of life, of the life in ourselves and each other and the world around us. We start to act and feel like machines. So I started to wonder if this machine story of ours might have something to do with so many of the environmental and social and even economic problems in the world. And I decided to go in search of life on Earth, to try to understand it better, and to see if it was possible to reconcile our aliveness with this machine story of ours. So I studied biology in search of the pattern of thriving living systems. And at the same time, I studied all the different theories about what makes organizations thrive or succeed. And for some reason, every biologist tells a different and very complicated story. And the same is true in organizational theory. But if you take a step back and you look at them all together, you see that they're all telling basically the same story. That at every level of human activity, it's the same simple pattern. And this pattern suggests a very different guiding story. The pattern is this. All living systems have 4 defining characteristics. First, there are parts. So that's the individual bees in a beehive. It's the trillions of cells that make up your body. And it's the people in an organization, each with unique passions and perspectives and contributions to share. The more diverse or divergent those parts can be, the more resilient and adaptive and creative the living system will be. And we know this from biodiversity, right? We need divergent parts. The second characteristic of living systems is that there is the level not of the parts, but of the whole. of an emergent whole with characteristics and capabilities of its own that can't be understood by looking only at the parts. So that's the whole beehive. It's you and your body. And you are so much more than just a collection of cells, right? You think and you feel and you move. And these are things that can't be understood by looking only at your cells. And it's the organization with its culture and its dynamics that lie at a level above that of the individuals. The more convergent the whole. So, for example, the more you remain recognizably you, even as your cells are continuously replaced, the more the organization remains focused on a clear, shared purpose, even as people come and go. The more convergence there is, the more resilient and adaptive and creative the living system will be. So there's this paradox that you want high levels of divergence, but also high levels of convergence if you want a thriving living system. The third characteristic of living systems is relationships. Dynamic relationships internally and externally. And the more open and free-flowing those relationships can be, the more resilient and adaptive and creative the living system will be. So you want to build a vibrant network of connections if you want a thriving living system. So we have divergent parts, convergent whole, dynamic relationships. The fourth characteristic of living systems is what some biologists call a self-integrating property. That means that by itself, the living system integrates divergent parts into a convergent whole in dynamic relationship internally and externally in an ongoing moment-by-moment process of self-organization and self-creation. So you got that? I'll say that again because it's really important. By itself, the living system integrates divergent parts into a convergent whole in dynamic relationship internally and externally in an ongoing moment-by-moment process of self-organization and self-creation. So that's what biologists call a self-integrating property. But when I saw that, I thought, that's life, right? That's whatever it is, whatever spark it is that animates us and makes us alive. And that process, that property, is amazing, right? Think about it by itself. It's the most precious miracle imaginable. And so am I, and so are you, because we are alive. So that's the pattern. Mix together divergent parts, convergent wholeness, dynamic relationship, and then let life do its self-integrative thing. And clearly, our organizations follow this pattern. And when I say this, I don't mean that they are like living systems in a metaphorical sense. I mean, they are living systems. They're an emergent level of life that results from the interactions of the people within. And that changes a lot from our original story that organizations are machines. But it doesn't change everything. All living systems do have mechanistic properties. Your heart is a pump, for example. Your wrist is a marvel of mechanical engineering. But these are just not the most important or powerful things about you. And the same is true of our organizations. So we don't need to abandon all the strategies we've developed so far. We just need to add a layer of living tissue to the machine. And when you look at the cutting edge of business today, you see that the most pioneering and successful companies are moving in exactly that direction. Their leaders are evolving into stewards or hosts, creating the fertile conditions for people to thrive. They're engaging their employees on a deep level, enabling them to be authentic and autonomous and passionate in their divergence. They're rallying their organizations around meaningful purpose as a strong point of convergence. They're moving from rigid hierarchy to open networked infrastructure. They're creating self-organizing teams and developing methods to tap into collective intelligence. And they're engaging their customers in meaningful conversation and community as they recognize the organization as an ecosystem in which customers and employees can't truly be considered separate. So this pattern of living systems helps us understand why these cutting-edge practices are so effective. But more important, the pattern helps us see that the true bottom line in business is life. And that really might change everything. And let me say, for the record, that I'm a big fan of profit, which is the current bottom line in business. Profit is good. But when we pursue it at all costs, including life, the outcome can't be good. So we have two choices. We can go into business with the goal of enabling life to thrive as much as possible at every level, knowing that along the way we're going to need resources like money and profit. Or we can go into business with the goal of making as much money as possible, and along the way we'll nurture life if we can. Those are the choices, and they each lead to very different outcomes. And I'll give you an example. I spoke at a conference a few months ago, and the man who spoke just before me was from a company that has the only technology in its industry to recycle the toxic heavy metals that they use in their production. Everyone else in the industry is forced instead to put those materials into the ground. And he explained that they recycle only for their own customers. And in his words, it wouldn't make business sense to recycle for everyone, even for a profitable fee, because the recycling technology is a source of competitive advantage. So they hoped that it would encourage everyone to buy from them in the first place. It wouldn't make business sense, in other words, to do everything in our power to keep toxic heavy metals from poisoning our water and soil. Can you see from this example how important it is to bring the goals of business and the goals of life together as one? I want every company out there to make good money. And if we see the organization as a machine, then that's enough. But if we see it as a living extension of ourselves, then it becomes reasonable to expect more, to aim not just for profitability, not even just for sustainability or responsibility, but for thrivability, in which the goal is to enable life to thrive as much as possible at every level, creating an organization that is successful and sustainable itself, and deeply nourishing for the people within, and enriching for the communities they serve, and in harmony with nature. It's a lot to ask, I know, but if we never set that as our goal, we will never get there. There's more. The good news, don't stop me before the good news. The good news is that we're just starting to turn in that direction. We're just starting. And those few pioneering and cutting-edge companies are showing us that that direction leads to better results, including financial results. There's something that gives me hope, that we will get there. I mentioned at the beginning that this pattern of living systems is present even at the level of all humanity. Well, if you look at the eras of humanity, you see that each era has had a distinct guiding story. So the hunter-gatherer era and hunter-gatherer cultures that still exist today had a story of convergent wholeness with no perception of separateness at all. In the agricultural era, this is when we developed the ability to be in relationship with nature and each other and the world around us. It was a story of relationship. And the industrial era was clearly guided by a story of separateness and divergence. So the big question is, what's the next guiding story going to be? Well, I think many of you in the room are in Generation Y. And if you look at the stereotypes about Generation Y, at work in particular, you find some clues about that next guiding story. The stereotypes say that you got to be you, and you won't conform because it's all about divergence. You insist on knowing how your work contributes to some larger, meaningful, convergent purpose or whole. You value the relationships in your social networks almost obsessively. And what I would add is that more than any generation before, you are able to integrate all of those into one coherent guiding story. And it's a fundamentally wiser story seeking to serve the needs of the parts and the whole and the relationships that connect them, seeking to nourish life. So here's what you have to do. Here's what we all have to do, actually. First, we have to make the conscious choice that life is the true bottom line. And then we have to imagine that new guiding story together and give it details and make it real and viable. We have to gather together and ask ourselves, how can we reinvent our organizations so they nourish the life within us and around us as much as possible? How can we reimagine ourselves, not as consumers, not as human capital, but as vibrant, thriving contributors to the whole of life? How can we recraft the artifacts and architecture of our organizations and our societies so they support wiser, more life-sustaining ways of being? These are the conversations we need to have. And as we go into them, we can find courage in the fact that the goal of business to ensure sustainable competitiveness and the goal of humanity to ensure the sustainability of human life, these goals are coalescing for the first time since the Industrial Revolution. We're beginning to see that the machine story isn't working anymore. It's incomplete, and it cannot deliver the resilience and adaptability and creativity we need. And as we begin to recognize and steward the life in our organizations and in ourselves and in the world around us, we are ushering in a new guiding story, and therefore a new era for all humanity. An era, it seems, of thrivability. So I'll meet you there. Thank you.